Warning: this video talks about suicide, sexual assault, and mental illness. If any of this may be harmful to you, this has been your warning. This video also contains spoilers for Perks of Being a Wallflower. I sat down with a friend first to get her take on what she knew about post-traumatic stress disorder. Hi, thank you for sitting down with me.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so first question, what do you know about PTSD?
I know PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. It affects people who have either experienced or seen something traumatic, and it results in things like night terrors, things like disassociation, and it's just all around not a very good thing to experience.
All right, second question. How prevalent do you think PTSD is in the United States?
I think it is very prevalent, because obviously, we have a ridiculous amount of veterans that have seen some horrible, horrible things, and that's a given. But then we also have the people in abusive households, the people who've experienced trauma at a very young age, people who have seen some stuff, people who've gone to prison, people who have witnessed police brutality, things like this, and everyone has some kind of trauma from that.
Yeah. What do you think the demographics are of people with PTSD?
I think PTSD can affect anyone. I don't think there's any one specific demographic that experiences it more.
Can you think of an example of PTSD in the media?
In the media?
Like
a portrayal of it?
Any form of entertainment or movie, television, book?
Yes, actually, in the book that I most recently read, it was a Star Wars book. It was called Star Wars: A New Dawn. It follows the story of former Jedi Knight Kanan Jarrus after he watched all of the Jedi be destroyed, basically. He watched his master die. He kind of severs his connection to the Force. He cuts himself off from that, and he kind of leaves himself alone, apart, save for the occasional one-night stand and things like that. And he'll have dreams recounting the events, and he'll wake up in a sweat, and he'll wake up in a panic and things like that.
And then I have one last question. What do you think artists or everyday people can do to bring more awareness to PTSD?
As far as everyday people are concerned, we're doing the best that we can to make mental health something that's at the forefront of conversation, but it's kind of also up to, people who have platforms. Not just your influencers, but your companies, your healthcare groups, someone that has a good social media following, because that's how we are these days. People need to bring these ideas to light, and not just the stigmatized waking up screaming of PTSD, but the smaller symptoms that you don't notice and the things like that. And I think we need to bring those to light, and people with platforms can absolutely be doing that better than just the everyday person.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Appreciate it. I think it's safe to say that psychological disorders haven't always had the best representation in the media. But today I wanted to talk about a time when I think that the representation of a mental disorder was well executed. I believe The Perks of Being a Wallflower is one of the best portrayals of a mental disorder in film. In 2012, Stephen Chbosky's best-selling book, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, was adapted into a feature-length film starring Logan Lerman and Emma Watson, and directed by none other than Chbosky himself. Taking place in 1991, Perks of Being a Wallflower is, at its heart, a coming-of-age film. And while it does have characters with mental disorders and themes of trauma, that isn't all it is. Perks is a showcase of how trauma and disorder doesn't have to define an individual, even if it has a strong effect on their life. First, it's important we know the disorder being covered. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a trauma-related disorder, as the name implies. PTSD is defined as a psychological disorder that develops through exposure to a traumatic event. In the DSM-5, this is clarified as exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. In order to be diagnosed with PTSD, not only does one have to undergo a traumatic event, but they must also have intrusive symptoms regarding the event. These symptoms can range from distressing memories or dreams to dissociative reactions, which refers to reliving the event, sometimes to the extent of losing all awareness of one's surroundings. Dissociative amnesia is extremely common in those suffering from trauma-related disorders, and is defined as extreme memory loss that is caused by extensive psychological stress. And you can see these symptoms on full display from the opening acts of the movie. We followed Charlie as he starts high school for the first time while recently being released from a mental health facility, followed by the death of his best friend Michael.
Where is Michael tonight?
Oh, he shot himself last May. Kinda wished he left a note, you know what I mean?
Throughout the course of the film, Charlie rediscovers his trauma of being sexually abused as a child by his Aunt Helen, who died when he was 7 years old. Several times we see Charlie struggling with his PTSD, but it isn't until the end of the film that we truly know where his trauma stems from. One thing that I believe Perks does extremely well is its visual representation of mental disorder and how it feels to have an episode. The film is told 100% from Charlie's perspective, so if Charlie sees something, so do we. If he doesn't, neither do we. Triggers or reminders of traumatic events can cause flashbacks or loss of awareness. We see this multiple times throughout the film. The very first time it occurs is somewhat subtle. After Charlie's sister Candace has a fight with her boyfriend, we see a brief flashback of Charlie on the stairs when Aunt Helen was visiting, which is then match cut to teenage Charlie in the same position as Candace comes back inside. While this is a brief detail the first time around, upon rewatching, it's clear that this is our first glimpse into Charlie's psyche. We see this multiple times and more prominently as the film progresses.
Can you see it, Charlie? The Luminaria is a landing strip for Santa Claus.
We hear Aunt Helen speak to Charlie before the flashback starts, which clues us into the fact that Charlie is reliving this moment in his mind. And as Charlie's mental state worsens, his flashbacks get more intense. I also think it's important to make note of the things Charlie does throughout the movie that are not symptoms of his PTSD, but rather coping mechanisms and grounding techniques.
Dear friend, I am writing to you because she said you listen and understand.
He was given an exercise by his therapist prior to the events of the film to write to someone called Friend. Whether or not this is a real person or letters to himself is not explicitly clear in the movie. However, it is not uncommon for therapists to tell their patients to write letters to themselves. The other thing we see Charlie do, especially in moments of high stress, is fidget. Fidgeting is a common self-soothing practice for almost everyone, but it is especially prominent in those with mental illnesses. Fidgeting can also get more intense as someone's mental state worsens, as we see when Charlie, quote, gets bad again. In the final act of the film, with only 15 minutes and 45 seconds to go, Charlie has realized, if only for a moment, that his trauma was not solely the result of his aunt's death.
What's wrong, Charlie?
Nothing.
However, the audience has not been officially clued in yet. This is important. Although this is the start of Charlie's true downward spiral, he is partially in the dark about the situation, and thus, so are we. An hour, 26 minutes, and 40 seconds in, we have our answer. A minute and 56 seconds after Charlie's half-realization, the audience is finally told about what Aunt Helen did.
Don't wake your sister.
And then occurs the most thoughtfully executed deterioration in a film.
Okay?
Charlie relives his trauma, disassociating more as the flashbacks continue. We see multiple versions of Charlie walking down the street dazed, representing how disassociation can feel like an out-of-body experience. We see Charlie beginning to blame himself, which is very common in people with PTSD, and continuously banging his head against the wall. While he tries to self-soothe by telling himself to stop crying and running his hands through his hair and rubbing his eyes, the thoughts eventually overwhelm him, and he reaches out to his sister before trying to hurt himself.
Candace, your brother's on the phone. Hello?
Hey, Candace.
Charlie?
Sam and Patrick left, and I just can't stop thinking about something.
What?
Candace, I killed Aunt Helen, didn't I? I've tried to stop thinking that, but I can't. She keeps driving away and dying.
Call the police and send them to my house.
Stop her. Crazy again.
No, Charlie, listen to me. Mom and Dad are gonna be home with Chris any second, and then...
Thinking, what if I wanted her to die, Candace?
What? Charlie? Charlie!
In addition to the fact that Perks has a very realistic depiction of how it feels to have a mental disorder, I think the reason that Perks has the best portrayal of mental illness I have ever seen in a film is they don't make it the only part of Charlie. Charlie loves to read. He makes friends, and he does what he can to make them happy.
Guys, 12:10.
What?
No more applications! No more SATs!
He gets into a relationship that doesn't work out so well. He goes to parties. And while certain disorders make it very difficult to do any of those things, it's important to note that even those who are struggling have more to their lives. It's harmful to have flat portrayals of those with mental illnesses in media, because then people may not realize those around them can be struggling too. It's perfectly summed up when he says he's not a sad story. So when I see Charlie make progress, I'm happy for him. And when I hear his monologue at the end of the film, I believe him.